Now, the ANC's January 8th policy statement takes place just days after the Zondo Commission's report on state capture was made public. To discuss the challenges the governing party now faces as a result of these findings, we're joined by political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe. Prof, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Now, the ANC has lost some support, as we saw last year, from the local government elections. What impact could this report have on their support moving forward, given the contents of the report and also its implications?
Well, the report simply catalogues what we already know. The Zondo Commission was a publicly conducted commission. And what Zondo did was simply to put a report based on the submission and also to identify people who he feels were to blame for state capture. So there's nothing really new in terms of what the public say is something that would be magically unknown. The people who have been identified were identified during the testimonies. But it's very important also to understand that this report might also be taken for review. Remember, the commissions, the most important aspect of the commission is to understand what happened and who was involved, but also most to find out what is it that needs to be done to make sure that this does not happen. It is for that reason that when President Ramaphosa received the report, he approached the court that he cannot simply respond to it immediately. He needs to study it so that they can come up with mechanisms and systems, because this is about the country trying to understand some of the challenges that it faces in a systemic and almost broad sense, so that it can take measures. And the people who have been implicated, what will happen is that the law enforcement agencies will deal with those where there's clear evidence of corruption.
Right.
But even then, there's always a challenge that because there was not a rigorous cross-examination of the people who were making implications, it might be possible that those who are implicated may also use the courts to exonerate themselves or to try to prove that they are innocent, because the commissions are free-flowing. We've seen people like Governmental coming up with all sorts of stories and imaginings. So this is unfortunately what you find with the commissions of inquiry.
Talking about measures that need to be taken ahead of the party's celebrations this weekend, would addressing and also acting on the state capture report be advisable? And would it perhaps work in their favor to actively fight against corruption, as they said they would?
Well, there are two aspects to what emerges from the report. And I think the president put it quite clearly. The one is the responsibility that government must do in terms of dealing with a systemic response. Then there's also the role of law enforcement agencies, the way they would simply say there was a crime committed here, was there corruption, malignancy, what do you do with that? So there'll be a role that is outside government. This is why President Ramaphosa was saying for government where he stands, there's a need for them to understand and study it, and so that they can respond comprehensively. But when it comes to issues of criminality, it is not up to him. It is up to the law enforcement agents to do their part. So the question is, will the ANC be implementing that? No, the ANC will not be doing anything about it other than to correct itself politically in terms of political morality. But here you are dealing with the state functions, a state apparatus having to do what they're supposed to do. So this is why the handling of it must be done in such a way that it's sensitive. It cannot be done where, because somebody is implicated, then you start coming up with saying that people must be removed or suspended from the organization, because those people still have a right to say, but that process itself was questionable. And there are findings that will be challenged in terms that are in Zondo Commission. You've already had people like Mzwane saying, or actually use the stronger language, that that which is in that is actually rubbish because it's not even corroborated by facts. It says he's been presented as an enabler, but there is no evidence that is presented about how he's enabled the state capture. So there are all those issues. So right now, we shouldn't really get excited. And I think the president is correct to say from government, there'll be a study, but from law enforcement agencies, they must do what they're supposed to do.
It's quite interesting that you have this posture calling for a bit more patience, which also echoes the same sentiment which has been raised by President Cyril Ramaphosa. But I guess the wider question here is, what position does this report put the president in? And is there a way which he can act on this report without getting scrutinized?
Well, I mean, whatever the president does will be scrutinized. I mean, and that is the responsibility of society, is the responsibility of opposition parties. And from the side of opposition parties, they would like to see the president act very swiftly. But also, you must understand, the president is also a political animal. He does not want to be seen to be rushing. You know, he chooses a path of caution. And anyway, that has always been in his nature. He's more slow to act on some of these issues until things become so bad that he is left with no choice. We remember how some of the scandals came. The people even resigned. They didn't wait for the president to actually fire them. So that is his posture. But he's also correct from the one side that if you start targeting people, then the problem with that is that you're going to deal with this piecemeal. Remember, even the report itself comes as piecemeal. So what President Ramaphosa said is simply saying, I would like to have the totality of the report. I would like to study it comprehensively and come up with a comprehensive response, which is really what the commissions must actually do. But at the same time, we also know that society is impatient with what it sees people who are corrupt getting away with murder. So they're simply saying the country must be seen to be dealing with corruption because of its effect on society. But at the same time, the president is also aware that there are some who may raise the issue that if you move too fast, especially in an election year, you might actually be using this to gain political mileage, which may be considered to be abusing state resources. So he is more careful. But the Zondo is a judge, and his words will be taken seriously. And I don't think the president can easily ignore that. It will be up to those people who are implicated. If they want to challenge it, they'll use the courts. And it's up to the law enforcement agencies to do what they're supposed to do, but understanding full well that some of the testimonies may themselves be questionable.
Now, Prof, very quickly, I want to just touch on the last point that you made about the president being cautious and not acting too hastily. Let's say that he does treat this matter with the urgency that it deserves. Could this cost him later when the ANC meets at conference?
No, I think if he does things right, remember our people, they are also discerning people in the same way that we've seen with elections. The ANC have taken the people for granted and assumed also because it projected itself and claimed that it is a leader of society. It felt that it owns the vote of the people. But the people were saying, after so many years, you have actually failed us. So they are going to apply their minds. So if the president does the right thing, the people, he'll be supported. But if he's seen to be abusing his powers, the people will react. They are not robots. They are going to read this with much caution. And also, we do come from a culture where state institutions were used against people. And people remember that very well. And they will make sure when they see it, they'll be the first to say, no, this one we're not going to support.
Well, Prof, always a pleasure chatting to you. That was political analyst Sipho Seepe speaking to us there about the ANC as it also gears up for its January 8th celebration set to take place this weekend.